Guys, welcome to that new episode of the First Responder Playbook. It's my pleasure to have Heidi Chance with me. Heidi was a 25-year detective with the Phoenix Police Department. She has a tremendous history in sex trafficking, human trafficking. Heidi, thanks for joining me tonight.
Absolutely. I'm happy to be here.
So tell me, how did you get down the law enforcement path?
My father is also law enforcement, and then actually, I'm third generation. So, his dad was NYPD. And so, my dad was Phoenix PD, and then I followed him. And my son doesn't want anything to do with being a police officer. So, there's that. Yeah.
I never did either. My dad was in law enforcement, and neither did my brother, and then we both ended up in it. So never
Yeah.
say never.
Right. He's only 23.
Yeah. My brother didn't get
Yeah.
into it. My older brother didn't get into it until he's 40.
Oh, wow.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so there's always still hope.
Hmm.
So tell me, what was the academy like at Phoenix? Was it a stay there academy, or did you get to go home at night? Um,
Oh, yeah. So I actually went through the academy. I mean, you could say twice. The first time I was 18, and they were doing a new program called the Cadet Trainee Program. And so at 18, I had just graduated high school in May. And then by September of 96, I got hired on um, as a civilian, but they sent you through the academy. And both academies were, just going through the day and then you come back the next morning. So it wasn't like a corrections type of academy or some other academies. But I literally was doing the cadet trainee program until I was 20 and a half, and then went in the academy for real. And then I turned 21 3 weeks before I graduated.
wow, that that's a long time.
Yeah.
What is do you have any favorite moments of your academy time?
Graduation day.
Yeah,
Getting the hell
yeah.
out of there. No. No, I definitely had a great time. Our academy class had some, people who made rules. I think we had one girl that celebrated a little too hard before graduation.
I've got dogs, I understand.
Okay, she celebrated a little bit too hard before the night before graduation, and actually came to graduation day inebriated. So she got in trouble and let go, and had to get on, I think, with another agency in another state, is I think what she was going to pursue. But yeah, we're creating stories for everybody to learn from our class.
So you get out of the academy, you do your time on patrol. How did you end up working in that specific specialized unit?
Oh, yeah. So I had done 3 years in patrol, and then I decided to have my son. And so I got off patrol, and when I came off pregnancy leave, I went to school resource officer, which I think is a similar story to a lot of female officers for at least some point in their career, especially when they're having families. And I blinked, and 6 years went by. And I don't know if this is true for your agency, but we don't get to take the police car home at
Oh no.
Phoenix. Yeah, so we have to turn the keys in. And so one day I was turning the keys in at the station, and I walked by this area of the police station called the juvenile holding area. And there's a little window in the door, and I happened to notice a little girl sitting in there. And then I recognized that she was a former student of mine that I had known when she was in seventh or eighth grade. So she would have been 13, 14. But on this day, she was 16, almost 17. And, she saw me, and I peeked my head in and I said, "Why are you in trouble?" And that's when she told me she was under arrest for prostitution. And at that time, I had already been a cop for, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years by then. And I knew prostitution was a crime. My precinct area was mostly residential. I just didn't know the kids got involved in this. And so that was kind of my shocking moment, I guess, that really inspired me to want to look at why is this happening to kids, and what could I do to start helping that problem. And that's when I started doing temporary assignments with the unit. Back then it was called Vice, but now it's called the Human Exploitation and Trafficking Unit. And, when I tested to go there, I spent the whole latter half of my career, almost 14 years there.
looking back on it, what could you tell or maybe change as somebody with a change, in a change position? There's a lot of that that probably goes on that patrol officers don't necessarily recognize. Be it in schools or just out around the community, around the schools. What are some things that like patrolmen, SROs can look out for to kind of combat that?
Yeah. I don't know if in your academy class you even had a trafficking class in your academy.
I hate to say this, but I'm getting kind of older myself, and it's been 10 years. I don't think we did actually.
No,
I
and
think I think that
that's the
I think
problem.
they've added it in now.
Yes.
But when I went through, I don't think it was there.
Yeah, so in 2014, that's when we first started even training our own officers in the academy to look for trafficking. So you have a whole bunch of cops out there that are looking for gangsters and drug dealers, and these pimps, they're bragging about us not seeing them. And they're not half wrong because as I travel around speaking and training law enforcement, I'm finding that that's the story that, that agencies are behind on even teaching patrol how to recognize this going on. But to your question, uh, in patrols, especially, recognizing on a call, like a domestic violence call or pulling a vehicle over or um, a loud noise complaint at a hotel, there are, just because the dispatcher calls it that doesn't mean it isn't something more, which I'm sure you know. And to keep your eyes open, to look for indicators like branding tattoos, like if you've got victims that all have the same tattoo or a very similar tattoo, that is intentional. The tattoos have a purpose. They have two purposes in my mind. The trafficking world is obviously involves a lot of manipulation, and part of that whole manipulation is this sense of family or belonging. And so we're all going to have the same tattoo. And then, second, the purpose for the tattoo is to advertise to other pimps, these ones are mine, I own these people. And so, looking for the tattoos, looking for someone speaking for someone else. That's why we separate people, trying to control the conversation, control what's being answered by the officers. If you're searching someone and you find that that person's holding everybody's phone or everyone's ID in the car, that's not normal. How come they don't have their own property on them? There's clues as far as that goes. And then for school resource officers, obviously it's keeping an eye out on those tattoos, keeping an eye out on students that all of a sudden become truant, or they show up to school dressed more provocatively than they were before, or they show up with an expensive item that, not to be judgy, but their family probably can't afford that Coach purse. Where did this gift come from? Because we've all been alive long enough to know that no one gives you anything for free without expecting something in return.
Right.
So we should ask questions about gifts and money and, unexplained cash and, a phone that just shows up out of nowhere, those kind of things. So there's definitely clues.
I'll never forget, especially in Oklahoma, we have such a prevalence of tribal casinos
Uh huh.
that
Same here.
are not in bigger towns. And so they'll be on major roadways, but they won't be necessarily in the big city. The first agency I worked for, I guess second agency I worked for, it bordered up to Tulsa, and it billed itself as the Tulsa casino, but it was not in Tulsa.
Mm.
And so our agency had 12 officers, I think, and it was branded as the Hard Rock Casino, and they didn't really push us to go up there and work it. Now I did, and I stumbled into a lot of things that, looking back on it, I probably missed a lot of things. But there was just so much criminal activity that flowed out of there, and I can only imagine that we weren't really doing our part because we didn't have the resources that Tulsa, that has 800 officers next to us. Um, and we've got to do a better job of training officers to see these warning signs, things to look out for, because we're missing a lot right
Oh,
now.
yeah. Hmm.
Um, I'll never forget. I was probably 4 years into my career. and I stumbled into a girl that had been, I don't want to necessarily say she was abducted because I never proved that officially, but her 21-year-old boyfriend, and she was, I think, 13 or 14, if I remember right, um, had talked her into running away from Nevada, from Las Vegas. And we had a truck stop casino, or truck stop, just a truck stop, a big quick trip truck stop in town. And, I always drove through there, and I noticed an old Jeep backed into the parking spot where all the trucks were parked. And I'm like, man, that's so weird. Like, why is this truck, this Jeep been back here? And so I went and did a consensual encounter. And I'll never forget, I had my partner with me and a state trooper. And I go up there, you couldn't see, there was so much stuff in the two front seats that you couldn't see anybody in the back. And it
Uh,
was so blacked out. Looking back on it, I'm glad it turned out the way it did because it could have went so much worse. But I was such a new cop that tactics weren't really necessarily in the top of my mind at that point. But I went back there and I made contact, and there was a mattress in the back of the Jeep, and there was a guy laying there, and he's like, "Hey, officer, how are you?" And there was a female laying there, and I couldn't tell how old she was at the time. Um, and I'm like, "Hey, man, I need to see your ID. This is kind of suspicious that you guys are back here." And I get his identification, and he gives me her name, and I don't remember what it was now at the top of my head, but he gave me two first names for her
mm,
name, and I'm like, that don't make any sense. And I looked up, I'm like, hey, I'm gonna go check run their information. And my partners had followed me back to the car. And I wish they would have stayed there. The next thing I know, he's throwing, I don't know how he got into the front seat with so much stuff being up there, but he threw the car in drive and threw it in reverse over the curb. And we actually got in a pursuit with no lights on. There was a stockyards right there, and we literally went through like the chutes, like everything in vehicles. And we're lucky that we didn't get in a shootout that night because he finally wrecks out in the stockyards. And I still don't know how he got away because it was a big open area with cattle. Um, but he ended up getting away.
mm,
But there was a pistol magazine that fell out by the driver's door. And it turns out he had made this girl run away, kidnapped her from Nevada, and they'd been on the run for 6, 7 months. And he was 21. I think she was 14, 13, 14. She was
mm,
pregnant.
mm,
Um, and they'd been working, odd jobs around the Tulsa area, trying to stay off the radar. And I stumbled into, I didn't know what I was looking for. I just knew that it didn't look right.
mhm.
And he actually ended up getting away. And this is a failure of the justice system. Um, we got her help. We got her to a women's shelter, and her mom flew out from Las Vegas that night and came and got her the next day. But he made it all the way back to Nevada somehow. I'm assuming probably hitching rides with truckers or something. But the U.S. Marshals picked him up very quickly, and Oklahoma ended up dropping their charges on him because I guess they didn't follow the interstate compact. And
Um,
and so there was so many, like we had charged him with everything: rape, kidnapping, vehicle pursuit, everything. And then the charges get dropped because procedure wasn't followed. Now
mm,
I think he ended up doing some prison time in Nevada, but the people like that, that's the people you want to hammer,
yeah. Mhm.
um, because they're going to do it again. And I'm just glad that I was able to get her off the streets and back to her parents. And I wish I'd have, had a way to find out how she's doing today. But,
Yeah.
the thing is I didn't know what I stumbled into. Um, I just knew it wasn't right. And we've got to change the training with the younger officers and make sure they're prepared to at least get in contact with like more seasoned officers to say, hey, I need you out here now.
Yeah.
Because the two guys I was with, I love them both to death. They're both friends, but they were just like, we're not going to watch them. Next thing I know, we're in a vehicle pursuit,
Right?
you know,
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
it's scary to look back on that because that could be anybody's daughter.
Hmm. Yeah, as you were telling me that story, I was thinking these guys are very charming, very cooperative. Yes, sir. No, sir. That just someone going over the top, being nice to us is a clue that we need to pay more attention to them for sure. Also, but these guys aren't worried. They're very transient, and they feel that these victims are so scared of them that they're not going to open their mouth and say anything. They're not going to snitch because they know that I already threatened that I'm going to do this, this, and this if you get me caught up in anything. And they believe those threats because they're very real to them. And a lot of times they don't say anything. So it's a matter of making observations, looking in the car, stories not matching up, and like I said, other indicators as far as who's holding what property, and treat that property like we do with drugs, where it was the right front pocket found by officer so and so at this date and time, because the phones are important. The phones are what gives us corroborative evidence of his word against her word. And we need to take it seriously that this phone and this phone were both found on him and in which pocket they were in, because I've been handed a bag of 9 phones before and no one could tell me where they were found. And a lot of those phones had text messages from the trafficker. And I'm like, well, what am I supposed to do? We don't know who they were on, or where they were found. So very
Yeah, we need
important.
to make sure that we're following, chain of evidence and custody like
Hmm.
that because that's something they're going to attack to try to get that case thrown out.
Yeah. And it's also a thing, even though a victim might not disclose the first time that a patrol officer has contact with them, there'll be another time. And, it is where this ultimate time, maybe this pimp is going to act like they don't know this person, they just barely met them. And because you've done a good job in prior police contacts, documenting who was with who and what tattoos and positively identifying these people, I've used that as a detective to show this person as a liar. And so, we just need to every time treat it the same way as professional and in policy and all those things as possible. So in that way, we never know when that's going to be used in the future.
Yeah, and I think you made a very good point in that we need to document every contact like it's something that can be used later on. I don't know how many times in my career, and like I said, I'm not above admitting there was a lot of things I probably didn't do properly growing up through the field. In that minor contacts are smaller agencies that I worked at didn't have policies on documenting every field contact, and so you may go out there and run them, and that may be in a dispatch log, but there wasn't any official, small, hey, this is why I made contact with this person at this date and time. And I can only imagine how many times stuff like this fell under the radar because these smaller agencies aren't documenting those things.
Yeah.
And how many contacts these people have with people that, you could say, hey, like, they made contact with them at this date and time. And we don't ever know that.
Yeah, well, I mean, just to put it in perspective, Phoenix is the fifth largest city in the United States. And even though it's that large, and when I first came on, we had 3,200 sworn officers. Right now, we're at 2,505. I looked at it the other day, and it's a lot of cops, a lot of people, a lot of movement in and out. But there is also this element in this criminal world, if we're specifically talking about this, where they're traveling, but they return to where the money's good. They return to where events are happening. Like we just had Super Bowl for what, the third time a few years ago. So I have had 4 pimps that I arrested, put in jail or prison, and they got out and went right back to pimping, and we've met again. So for it being a huge city, how is that possible? Because we're in that element and we're in that world, and so you will meet them again.
How much in your time in the unit did, because you've made mention of this, has technology changed, from probably when you first got in the unit to towards the end of your career, how important it is to document the like cell phones and smartphones and stuff like that. Um,
Yeah.
are you also using um, like business cameras as well to like keep track of like your height, your heat point areas, stuff like that? Um, is that something like officers probably need to be aware of? Like, if they're in a local area at a hotel or a restaurant area that's got cameras, is that something officers should be aware of to use those for evidentiary purposes to try to get that footage?
Yeah,
um,
I mean, it's one of those where unfortunately Phoenix has um, what do we have, like 5 or 6 blades, and a blade is a known area for street prostitution. And so, and this is like, miles and miles of this street area. There's 4 or 5 girls on every corner in thongs and pasties. It's that bad. I mean, it's also online as well, but it's blown up on the streets. It's like Figueroa in California, or Tropicana in Decatur in Las Vegas. So, knowing the businesses, because there are businesses, there are churches, there are schools, there are homes in those areas, and knowing that there might be recordings of this. But it's also using technology. For example, YouTube. There's a whole bunch of YouTubers and the Instagram pages, Down and Dirty Phoenix Streets, where I have used the actual video recordings that they've done of this activity in my own investigation, putting people together. So paying attention to the social media as well, and YouTube, as far as the activity that they're recording for views or whatever. But we're also paying attention to that for our cases.
that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I love to hear that because we've got to start clamping down on this the best we can.
Yeah.
So, how did you decide it's time to hang it up and you were ready to start training other officers?
Well, so I left Phoenix Police Department in 2021. But I did go to another law enforcement agency. And in between, I did start my own business because I've had so many success stories that I think it's disheartening to be overwhelmed with the problem and not hear the good news. And so sharing, my investigations, how I got to the point where I have a pimp that I put away for 493.5 years in prison, and having a 7-month long trial and all the things that I had to go through to get to that sentence of almost 500 years. Telling those stories really helps show officers this can happen, this can be done. And I think that we need to share the good news of, some incredible sentences that these guys have gotten, and that we're holding these people accountable.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Um, Now let's talk about the real um, holy grail for a lot of cops, and I feel like there's a lot of cops out there that have stories to tell, but they're so afraid of it. How did you decide to write a book?
Oh, well, the book is more about helping us because we're overwhelmed, especially with social media and all these games and the ability for predators, traffickers, sex buyers, all to come in to kids' bedroom and talk to them without their parents even knowing what's going on. So I wrote the book because I do community awareness presentations also, because I believe an informed jury comes from an informed public. And that's the only way we would get a sentence like 500 years. If we have a jury that understands that when I testify, this person's a prostitute, she's been committing this crime, but I also need you to see her as a victim. And also, she's not trapped in a bedroom or handcuffed to the wall or anything. She's freely walking down the side of the road with a phone in their hand, but I'm telling you, she's trapped and not free to leave. Having the jury wrap their head around that is super important. But my point with all of that is when I'm doing these community awareness presentations, I'm telling the audience, when I first started investigating this crime, the national average age of entry was 15. Today it's 13 years old, and we've rescued some 11, 12-year-olds, which means it's getting worse, not better. Law enforcement can't do it all. And we need parents to step up to the plate and start educating themselves about these apps, the social media, the games, and how this is happening, and talk to their kids. That's why it's called Talk to Them. And it's a guide on how to have that difficult conversation, modeled after how I would conduct a forensic interview with a victim who really doesn't want to talk to me. So I might know a thing or two about getting someone to talk to me and telling me about their worst day. And I put that strategy into the book so that parents can converse with their kids in a way that comes across not judgmental, not, you know, uh, authoritative, and it's building rapport and everything else. So it was a thing that I wanted to do because I see it as a way to maybe put some prevention on this problem before it becomes our issue, because we have way too much going on to handle it all. We really do. And so I translated it. I had it translated in Spanish because it's also a vulnerability for parents who don't speak English. That new boyfriend comes in with the little girl, and this little girl's been doing all of the communication for this parent that doesn't speak English, and they don't know what's up. And the pimps are targeting that little girl because they know the parents don't know what's up, because they don't understand. And so I really felt it critical to get this book in the hands of non-English speaking parents. So then that way we also don't have that exploding in that demographic as well. So I will move on to other languages, I'm sure. Just I'm starting with the two. And
There's so much there's so much to unpack there.
yeah.
So I'm going to
Hmm.
try to tackle it a little bit at a time.
Yeah.
Talk about your original point. Um, I think you're absolutely spot on in that a lot of the general public doesn't understand that these children, women that are put in these situations are victims, and yet they may still be in this criminal element. You know, like you said, walking the street with a cell phone, but they're not really free to leave. They're so deeply involved in that culture at that point that they're not free to leave, even though that they have a phone. You know, they may have a car. Um, they're so brainwashed, scared, um, that they have to realize that, you know, they may be involved in the criminal element themselves, but they're still a victim, and you still need to treat them as such.
Yeah.
And remember that they are a person, and we need to try to change that culture a little bit of black and white, in that you know, we've got to do a better job of that. So I love that for
Yeah.
sure.
Well, we had to
Um,
change it too. Like we were just arresting prostitutes all day long when I first started. And in fact, the squad that I was on only allowed for one female position because you needed male undercovers to arrest prostitutes. So we've evolved into asking the question we were not asking before is number one, what can we do to get you out of this? And number two, seeing the real people who are committing the crime here that are the sex buyers and the traffickers, and you need female undercovers to target sex buyers and traffickers.
yep, absolutely. Um, you also touched on a very good point in that your book has been translated into Spanish.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's any part of this country right now to where there's not a pretty sizable Hispanic, you know, like there's always a sizable Hispanic population. And there is a culture issue of people not speaking English as their first language. But they also have the fear of police because they may not be here legally, and they won't report these issues because they're afraid of what might happen. Um, I'm not one to jump into big hot button issues, but we've got to treat these people that are here as people and make inroads into their community to help them, because they are afraid to report crimes, not just trafficking issues, but general crimes of all sorts, because we don't want any contact with the police. But we also have to get people that are here legally that do speak Spanish and get them involved in police work, because we need to make inroads in these communities. And
Mhm.
so I think we're starting to slowly do better in those areas, but we still have a lot of work to do.
Yeah. And, kids are kids, no matter what their race or nationality is.
Yep. Well, and that was my last one because I saved it for
Mhm.
last because it's changed so much. I remember 15 years ago when I was in college and there wasn't smartphones.
Mhm.
Um, I still had the brick cell phones and flip phones, and the world has changed so much in that time. In that there's all these, Xbox and PlayStations where kids can make contact with people very quickly with people across the world. Um, Social media has just blown up. There's 87 billion different types of social media where they
Mhm.
can, make contact with people. The days of, me leaving my house growing up with my parents and saying, "Hey, I'm going to go ride my bike around the neighborhood," it doesn't happen near as much anymore. Kids are playing video games. Parents need to be able to be a parent and to have those tough conversations with their kids and not just bury their head in the sand and say, "It's not going to happen to my kids," because it will. Um, I love that your book is out there having these tough conversations, um, because they need to happen. Parents, burying their head in the sand is
Yeah.
going to get people hurt.
Yeah. I mean, part of it is having the parents do this so then that way the kids can recognize when it's happening and self police themselves and have that open communication that, okay, it's happening. This stranger is asking me personal information about myself or asking me to keep things a secret or delete messages or trip to a Snapchat. And my mom told me about all of this. And that's all I'm trying to accomplish here with the book is recognizing it, having your children recognize it, stop engaging with that person, and then go tell your parent about it. That's it. So, and then obviously I do have a chapter on the unfortunate circumstance if something does happen and you have, something to report, how to interact with the police, um, how to capture the evidence without it getting destroyed or notifying the guy on the other end that you just screenshotted, the picture or whatever, how to get it removed off the internet, all of those kind of things.
That's awesome. So what's next for you?
Well, I've got to be able to figure out how to market this Spanish version of my book when I don't speak Spanish. So that's going to be a challenge. I need some advice on where to go for that. But in addition to that, obviously, I'm doing training for law enforcement nationwide, and I am traveling around speaking. I just came back from DC yesterday. I spoke at the HSI conference. Prior to that, I was in Ohio doing a female undercover school for 25 female undercover officers. Prior to that, I was in Connecticut doing a 2-day human trafficking advanced training school. So I'm doing a lot of education to law enforcement and then community organizations. I mean, I am doing training at casinos for security and hotel staff on what to recognize, and then traveling around teaching about community awareness everywhere that I can because, again, I'm a huge proponent of an informed public who's going to sit on our juries.
Yeah, absolutely. And I may be able to help you out with some networking opportunities with some Spanish
Okay.
speaking officers that
Yeah.
are in those type of situations that might be able to help you out and network a
Yeah.
little bit to spread the word because, like I said, I'm all about making our officers better trained. And
Yeah.
I've never been one that's been too proud to say, like, hey, there's certain areas in this job I'm probably not very good at, but this is why I got a podcast so I can spread
Yeah.
this message out there into those areas.
Yeah.
So, I try to always end these podcasts on a positive message. Um, Looking back at 18, 19-year-old you, and now you're um, 25 years plus into the job, what is one word of wisdom that you would share with somebody wanting to get into law enforcement today that could, either get them into the job to tell them, hey, it's worth it, or hey, stick with it? Because, I think everybody gets to that point in their career, they're like, burned out. I want to get out. Am I really making a difference? What's something you could share with the next generation that to make sure they keep doing the good fight?
Yeah, I mean, I just spoke at a women's leadership conference in Texas, and um, it's one of those things where, especially for female officers, there's a lot that are on for a couple of years, and then they feel mistreated. They feel just that they're not being treated the same, and to hang in there, and for the ones that exist today to be a mentor, be taking someone under your wing. We need to change this whole behavior of rookies, and we need to encourage, because that's the only way that we're going to keep officers, and we really, really need officers. So we need to start treating each other better, and taking each other on as, to help each other throughout this tough career. It's tough enough already out there. We don't need to be mean to each other. And people, all the time say that the only time that we're nice to each other is at a funeral for an officer, and that's ridiculous. So I think um, I think we need to pay attention to that more.
Wholeheartedly agree with that. We don't need to compete with each other. We need to celebrate each other. Is the way I try to look at it. In that um, we're all there. This job is a lot of alpha personalities.
Yeah,
Um, and we need to celebrate our partners' wins as much as our own. And we don't need to push them down. We need to lift them up. And trust me, I wholeheartedly see exactly what you're talking about. And we've got to change that.
yeah.
So Heidi, thank you so much for joining me tonight. And you're always welcome back on here.
Oh, thank you.
If something else pops up that you want to get out there, just let me know and we will get you back on the show.
Awesome. And let me know if you have anybody who has a burning question for me either. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
We'll definitely stay in touch. Thank you so much.
you're welcome. Thank you.